I didn't miss her right away. That surprised me. When she moved back into the city, I thought it would feel heavier, awkward, unsettling. Instead, it felt ordinary, like she'd always been part of the background. I found out through someone else, a casual mention. She's back, took a place near the river. Near enough to run into, far enough to pretend it wouldn't happen. We'd ended things cleanly, no dramatic rupture, no final scene, just a mutual agreement that we'd become quieter around each other. I told myself I was fine with that. I was good at being fine. The first time I saw her again, it wasn't planned. A crosswalk, red light, crowded street. She looked over, recognized me, smiled. Not the smile you use to protect yourself, the one you use when you've already made peace. "Hey," she said. "Hey," I replied. We stood there while traffic waited, two people pretending we didn't feel the pause. "How long are you back for?" I asked. "Indefinitely," she said. That word settled between us. We talked for a minute. Work, weather, the usual inventory. Then the light changed. She nodded once and stepped away. No invitation. No closure. I walked the rest of the way home slower than usual, not because I was sad, because something had shifted. I started noticing how often I thought about proximity. Not her. Distance. The idea that something meaningful could exist nearby without being accessible. A few days later, I passed the river after work. I didn't expect to see her. I didn't avoid it either. She was there, sitting on the low wall, looking at the water. I almost kept walking. Then she turned. "Hey," she said again. Different this time, less polite, more open. I sat beside her, not too close, not far. We watched the water move, quiet. "Does it feel strange?" she asked. "Being back? Being near," she clarified. "Yes," I said, not elaborating. She nodded. "I thought so." We didn't talk about why we'd ended. That felt too obvious, too rehearsed. Instead, she asked me something unexpected. "Do you think people can care deeply without wanting the same future?" I thought about it longer than necessary. "I think they do it all the time," I said. She smiled faintly. That's what I was afraid of. The silence after that wasn't awkward. It was loaded. I noticed how careful I was being. Measuring words, monitoring tone. Old habits. We stood up at the same time. No plan, no promise. As we parted, she said something quietly. Living close doesn't mean living connected. That stayed with me. Over the next weeks, we ran into each other often. At the grocery store, at the cafe, along the river. Always brief, always polite, always unfinished. I told myself it was coincidence, the city proving how small it can feel. But I also knew this. Some connections don't end. They just change shape. And being near someone you once loved can feel more demanding than letting them go entirely. I didn't know yet what I wanted from her, or if wanting anything was still an option. What I did know was this. Proximity had reopened questions I'd convinced myself were settled. And standing that close without touching felt like a test. That's what made it dangerous. It was always accidental. A shared sidewalk, a familiar hour, the same unspoken decision not to turn away. We stopped pretending it was coincidence when it became routine. Tuesday evenings by the river, Saturday mornings at the cafe. Nothing was planned. Nothing was denied. We never touched, not once, and somehow that made everything louder. She talked about her work, about the city feeling different now, less urgent, more forgiving. I talked about nothing important, things that required no vulnerability. Sometimes she looked at me like she was waiting, not for a confession, for honesty. I gave her fragments, carefully measured truths. One evening, she asked me something I hadn't prepared for. "Do you miss what we were?" I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know, because I did. "I miss the clarity," I said finally. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Me too. We sat in silence longer than usual. The river was loud that night. "I thought moving back would help me understand things," she said. "Understand what?" I asked. Whether closeness still meant something. That word again, closeness. I realized then how carefully she was watching me, not in desperation, in assessment, like she was deciding whether this version of me was safe. I asked her something I'd avoided. Why did you really come back? She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was calm. Because distance didn't fix what I hoped it would. That landed heavier than anything she'd said before. The weeks after that felt suspended, like we were hovering just above a decision. I noticed how I adjusted my schedule, how I timed my walks, how I listened for her voice in familiar places. This wasn't accidental anymore. It was negotiated silence. One afternoon, she didn't show up, not at the river, not at the cafe. I told myself not to read into it. I failed. The next day, I saw her unexpectedly. She looked tired. Sorry, she said before I could ask. I needed space. I nodded. Too quickly. She studied my face. You didn't miss me, she said. Not accusing, observing. I did, I said, truth slipping out. She looked away. That's the problem. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I wanted her back, because I didn't know what wanting meant anymore. Being near her had blurred the boundaries I relied on. I realized something uncomfortable. I liked the version of us that existed now. No responsibility, no future, just presence. And that scared me more than commitment ever had. The next time we met, she was quieter, more resolved. I can't keep doing this, she said. This in between. I knew what she meant. I just didn't know how to respond. Being close without direction feels like waiting, she continued, and I don't want to wait anymore. I watched her carefully, trying to read what she needed from me. I asked the only honest question I had. What would you choose if proximity wasn't an option? She looked at me for a long time, long enough for the answer to matter. Then she said quietly, I'd choose distance, because closeness shouldn't hurt this much. She stood up, didn't rush, didn't linger. As she walked away, I realized something I hadn't before. Being near her had been my way of avoiding a decision. And now I didn't see her I was going to have to make one. Not by accident, not by design. At first, I told myself it was relief. No more wondering, no more half sentences, no more pretending silence wasn't heavy. But relief doesn't follow you home at night. Understanding does. I replayed her last words more than I wanted to admit. Closeness shouldn't hurt this much. I realized how often I had confused comfort with safety, how easy it was to stay near someone without choosing them. Distance forces clarity. That's why we avoid it. One evening, I walked by the river alone, the same path, the same hour. She wasn't there, and for the first time, I didn't expect her to be. I sat on the bench where we used to talk, not to remember, to measure. What had we really been doing? We weren't rebuilding. We weren't healing. We were preserving something unfinished because it felt familiar. That's not love. That's fear with good manners. A few days later, I received a message. No apology, no explanation, just honesty. I needed to leave before staying turned into resentment. I read it twice, then once more. I didn't reply immediately, not because I didn't care, because I finally did. I understood her choice, and more importantly, I respected it. Later that night, I wrote back. You were right. Closeness without direction isn't kindness. It's delay. She replied an hour later. I hope distance gives you what proximity couldn't. I closed the phone, and for the first time in a long while, I felt calm. Weeks passed, then months. Life didn't change dramatically. No sudden clarity, no cinematic realization. Just quieter thoughts, more deliberate choices. I noticed how I stopped seeking familiar faces in crowds. How I allowed moments to end without forcing continuation. I learned something important. Some people don't return to stay. They return to show you who you've become. We never met again, not because it would hurt, but because it wasn't necessary. Distance had done its work, and one day without ceremony, I stopped missing what we almost were. I didn't lose her. I released a version of myself that was afraid to choose. Sometimes the most honest ending is the one that doesn't ask for another beginning.